first article we will look at today is by the Classroom Link, and it's also by Pearson. It's entitled, "If We Teach Today's Students as We Taught Yesterday's." Students expect that what they are learning is relevant to their lives. They expect their classrooms to be student-centered, which is different from how you and I learned when it was teacher-centered. Students now want to construct and build their own knowledge off of the things that they have learned. This, of course, reminds me of North Carolina Teaching Candidate Standard 3D, which talks about how teachers make instructions relevant to their students. This means that in my future classroom, I need to provide students with the tools to grow their understanding. For example, if we're learning about plants in my class, then I could actually have the students, put the seeds in the soil, water it, take care of it, and we could watch the plants grow, and that would bring the chapter that we are learning about, for example, plants, or the concepts about plant life, to life to the students, and they are able to actually see it and observe it. I also like the example that they have given. For example, if the teacher is trying to teach them about the difference between sweet and salty and what those words mean, the teacher could bring in sweet pieces of candy and salty popcorn to have the students really taste the difference between the two, and then they'll be able to understand it better. This is how students today learn and process information. They're no longer going to accept a teacher just reading verbatim the textbook. They expect the teacher and the learning to come alive. They expect to be a part of their learning experience. This means that me, as a future teacher, needs to focus on how to really bring the concepts that we are learning in class to life, and to make it so exciting for my students, and make sure that they are growing and working on their own understanding and building that knowledge themselves, instead of me just teaching it to them. Another thing that we know about 21st century learners that really doesn't require that much research is that they are good and they know how to work technology. Technology, of course, will be a critical part of the classroom. So this means that me, as a future teacher, that I need to learn how to work technology myself. This, of course, falls under Standard 4D, which says that teachers integrate and utilize technology in their instruction. One way that I could utilize technology in my instruction when I'm a teacher is I can help the students develop critical thinking skills, as this article states. Because they have technology available at their fingertips, they've got the world of information, but not all of that information is true. So I can teach them how to critically think and go through resources to determine if they're valid or invalid, or if they're just someone's made-up opinion. This is important for 21st century learners. This is something that they need to know. They need to know how to critically think. So it is my goal as a teacher to develop their critical thinking skills. Another way I could do this is through guided questions. Questions that don't necessarily have a right and a wrong answer. They just get the class to really think about what they are learning and about the lessons that they have been learning in class. It really helps to develop that critical thinking skill that is important for today's 21st century learner. Of course, this falls under Standard 4E, which states that teachers help students develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills. I found another article that has to deal with 21st century learners, but this article focuses on one particular aspect that we all know about 21st century learners: technology. This one's entitled Technology Integration for the New 21st Century Learner, and it is by Nancy Blair. The article opens up by giving the readers an awareness of how good the 21st century learner is at using technology. For example, they talk about how kindergartners know how to work iPod touches, and then you have middle schoolers who know how to write blogs and use YouTube channels. Another interesting thing that this article points out is that the new 21st century learners demand quick access to new knowledge. They want it to be fast and accessible, just like the internet and today's technology. So, what does that mean for today's teachers? Well, I liked how they opened up this section of the article. It says the new 21st century learners must master more than the core curriculum to succeed in secondary and post-secondary institutions, as well as in the workplace. This means that, their knowledge must go beyond just the regular subjects that we know, because they need to learn how to utilize technology, because technology is such a huge part of today's world. Teachers now must teach through technology, as this article states, and they more so act as facilitators in the learning experience rather than just the teacher in front of the classroom that does all the talking. This, of course, reminds me of Teacher Candidate Standard 4, which states that teachers facilitate learning for their students. This is similar to the other article that I was talking about, where it talks about the shift of the student and the teacher roles. The teacher is now being the facilitator of what is occurring in the classroom. So the students are building and experimenting and constructing their own knowledge, while the teacher is simply up there guiding and scaffolding the students' learning. This means that I, as a future teacher, will need to learn how to be more of a facilitator to the students and not just teach in front of the classroom just like my teachers did back when I was in elementary school. The learners today expect differently. Another great way 21st century learners like to be involved with their education is they like to create and design things in the classroom. And this article points out how it develops their creativity and their problem-solving skills. This, of course, goes back to Standard 4E, which talks about how teachers help students develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills. This article also gives an example of a school in Florida and how they are integrating technology into their classes. You've got kindergartners who are creating movies. You have first graders developing PowerPoints. This just gives me a good idea of what I can expect of, the students that I teach and what they will be capable of doing and dealing with technology. I'll probably have to help more so with the younger kids, and technology will have to be more simplistic, but they still can work technology and they know how to use it. Another thing that I really liked about this article was this last sentence here. It says, technological devices provide tremendous benefits to students, but they are not the backbone of 21st century learning. As future teachers, we have to remember not to teach how to use technology. We are not teaching the technology. We are simply using the technology as a tool for the students' learning, and that's what the students should be using the technology for, just to be able to learn more and to grow their knowledge and understanding of the concept that we are trying to teach. The final article is the best find for this particular project. It is called 21 Characteristics of 21st Century Learners, and it's by Dr. Sarah Eaton. I'll just go over a couple of the characteristics that really stood out to me. And I'll start out with the first one, which says that they want to have a say in their education. This reminds me of differentiation and personalizing students' education, and how we as teachers need to treat them as individual learners. This reminds me of Teaching Candidate Standard 2C, which says that teachers need to treat students as individuals. This also reminds me of the ideas of the past few articles that we've gone over and covered, about the classrooms moving from being teacher-centered to student-centered. These students nowadays want to have a voice in their education. They want to build on their knowledge and understanding, and they want to understand and learn the way that they can. Of course, it goes over characteristics that we already know, like number 2, when it says that they often have higher levels of digital literacy than parents or teachers. I know that they certainly have higher levels of digital literacy than I do, but it is something that I have to work on while I'm still in school, is how to utilize technology best in the classroom and how I can get the students to really be active on computers and using iPads to learn more about a concept that we are going over in my future classroom. Another characteristic that stood out to me was number 6, and how it talks about how 21st century learners want to express their creativity, and they don't want to just memorize like we did growing up in school. This makes me think that in my future classroom, I want to come up with ideas where the students can really express their creativity. That means when I create like a project and a rubric, I don't want the rubric to be too constricting on what my students can do. Like, I don't want to be like, design a PowerPoint that talks about something that we've gone over in class, like, for example, plant life. I don't want them just to feel limited in what they can do. I want them to be able to express ways, differently. Maybe they want to create like a little cartoon, or they want to film themselves talking about the plant life. I want to give my students room for creativity. Another characteristic that stood out to me was number 8, when it says they collaborate amazingly well. This is different from how you and I used to learn, when it was more focused on, individualized learning. Today's students like to work together in small groups, like to solve problems and bounce ideas off of one another. This means that I, as a future teacher, need to focus on putting my students in groups that will work well together, and where they can really learn and grow their understanding by working with other students in the class. This reminds me of North Carolina Teaching Candidate Standard 4F, which states that teachers help students work in teams and develop leadership qualities. When I become a teacher, I will have to not only put them in groups where they can work well with one another and grow their understanding, but I also need to make sure that they are demonstrating leadership qualities. Like, I could give the groups, each member in the group, a different job, like a manager and a reporter, just to make sure that each student feels involved in what the group is learning. Another characteristic that really stood out to me was characteristic number 14, which states that 21st century learners have a multicultural awareness and appreciation. This, of course, reminds me of North Carolina Teaching Candidate Standard number 2, where it says teachers establish a respectful environment for a diverse population of students. Since my students will have a multicultural awareness and attitude, I'll have to learn about the different cultures that I will encounter in my class. I am learning so much in EDU 350 about diverse populations that I feel will be really useful and helpful for me as I become a future teacher. I will have to know about the students' different learning abilities and about the different cultures that they come from and how it affects their learning styles. Another characteristic that really stood out to me was characteristic number 20, which states that 21st century learners expect interdisciplinarity. This means that they don't expect learning like we did back when we were in school, where you have math, English language arts, science, social studies, and they were just different subjects completely. They expect for there to be a main underlying concept that stretches in all the subject areas, so it seems like all the subject areas flow together under that main concept. This, of course, reminds me of North Carolina Teaching Candidate Standard 3C, which states that teachers recognize the interconnectedness of content areas/disciplines. This means that when I become a future teacher, and as I develop lesson plans throughout my, student career here at Gardner-Webb, I have to focus on main concepts that can bridge through all the subject areas. I don't want my students to just feel like going from math to English language arts to social studies to science. I want them to see that main concept that I'm trying to get across. For example, it reminds me of our unit, our concept-based unit. Like, I have the main concepts, diversity and cultures, and those are the concepts that I want my students to grasp throughout each lesson that I teach throughout the unit.